Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is Victor Shi. It is Friday, February 24th. We've made it through another chaotic week with no shortage of new news. Today, we're going to be talking about how Republicans are angering two groups of people who turned out in historic numbers in the 2022 midterm election, young people and women. In 2022, Republicans overturned the right to abortion, which is one of the biggest reasons why young people and women turned out and were fired up in 2022. You'd think that now they would learn their lesson, but Republicans keep waging a war against young people and women. They were making it harder. They're making it harder to access abortion. They are limiting what students can learn in the classroom. And they're also failing to keep our lives safer by enacting common sense gun reform. What should we make of this? And what do Democrats have to do to make sure Republicans don't gain control of power again in 2024? I'm joined by my good friend Joanne Carducci, who many of you might know on Twitter as JoJofromJerz. She is someone who not only keeps us all informed, but she's also one of the very few people who's willing to go directly toe-to-toe and honestly and effectively call out Republicans for everything they're trying to do. Joe, it's so great to see you in person, not in person, but face-to-face this morning. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you again in person. But I mean, we've been in the same zip code and the same very iconic location at the same time, and we haven't connected. But this is good for now.
One day, yes. This will do for now. But one day, there's so much to get to. But I want to ask you about 2022, which is something that we talk a lot about. We've talked a lot about. Much of your work is aimed at mobilizing women and specifically suburban women and moms. Can you talk about that demographic and what you think got them out and voting in 2022?
Well, I often talk about how there are sort of two moments in recent history that have activated suburban women, one of which was the election of Donald Trump in 2016, which was my personal story. And then we have what happened with the Dobbs decision last summer. So there's these two waves of suburban women that I feel like were activated by those two events. And really, there is a drive from my perspective as a suburban mom in particular, both to protect my kids and to ensure that the future that they have looks better than the reality that I've known. We're always striving, right, to make the world a better place. And so that's what drives me. That's what drives a lot of women. I know that not every suburban woman has children, but for their community in general, that the idea that there's so much intersectionality here between your generation and mine is that we share the same goals towards improving the future for all Americans, particularly our kids.
Absolutely. And you think that the resounding rejection of the Republican Party and intense desire to want something normal from young people and women in 2022 would move Republicans, but it didn't. Kevin McCarthy has been in control for more than a month now at this point, and I'm wondering what your take is on how Republicans have operated.
I mean, obviously, they've shown themselves to be every bit the chaos caucus we expected they would be, which to me signals that both they weren't listening to what we told them in the midterms, which it was sort of an overwhelming message that we don't have the tolerance nor the appetite for this chaos, that people want competency, they want action, they want legislation, they want change. So they're not listening to that, but they're also just sort of saying that they don't care. They're discarding it. Yeah. They're saying, and you have to wonder why. Why do they think they don't need to care about what the voters want to see reflected in their politicians? It's a really interesting question because it seems to me very anti-democratic, right? So they don't really care if they're reflecting the needs and wants of the voters.
So, I mean, it's not just on the federal level either. Something you and I often talk about is our nation's gun violence. Republicans on both the federal and state level refuse to act in the face of sustained and continued mass shootings. I'm wondering if you think that there is any sense of policymaking left in this Republican Party and what not, and if not, going back to what you just said, what is their end goal with all of this?
I mean, as far as gun violence goes, they've made it very plain that they don't care about your generation having to have this be your reality. And they don't care about my generation having to worry about sending our kids off to school every day. They're not even offering thoughts and prayers anymore. I mean, with the Michigan State shooting, there was silence. Ted Cruz didn't even get to thoughts and prayers. There was just silence. So their end game is to sow chaos. Their end game, I was talking to Fred Gutenberg yesterday about this, and he said it so well, and it really stood out to me. He said, what they're trying to do because I don't know if you saw this legislation that Representative Moore is trying to pass,
Oh,
but he
yeah.
won't, making the AR-15, the weapon that's been used in numerous mass shootings, the
Yeah.
national gun of the United States of America. So I asked Fred, what is their end game with that? And he said the idea is to have people like you and me see something like that and be so disheartened that we left feeling hopeless, throw our hands up in the air and say, look,
Hmm.
we're screaming into the void and nothing is happening. This is what they're doing in
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
And put our heads in the sand and not get involved. And that's what they want. And that's what we cannot do.
That's so true, and, it seems like one of their main goals is just to throw so much information at us, do so much that it gets us exhausted and, like you said, or like Fred said, hopeless, and, we can't give into that. But there's one other issue I wanna talk to you about before we kind of zoom out and talk more about messaging in 2024, and that's education. And there is kind of two kind of ways to look at it. First, that it's an attack on young people, but it's also an attack on the parents of young people and what they're sending their kids to school to do. I mean, is it to actually learn about history and to actually gain a better understanding of our nation's history, or is it to have things limited in terms of what we can understand, banning books and limiting curriculum and limiting certain courses? I'm wondering if you've talked to anyone who has fallen for maybe what Republicans have been trying to do in terms of pushing critical race theory, and if so, kind of why you have these two really disparate camps of, I guess, suburban women or moms, one that says this is terrible for children, one that actually believes in what Republicans are doing and that their kids are being indoctrinated.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know personally anyone. I mean, I haven't had conversations with anyone, although there's probably quite a few people in my town who believe this because I live in a very red town. But I do know from the other side my perspective on what they're doing. So
Yeah.
I've had a lot of conversations from everyone from Jess Piper in Missouri, to local people. I have just recently discovered that some friends of mine in 2 towns over just last night had a board meeting where the board banned a book. Even though a committee had recommended that it was fine within the curriculum, this very extremist board was still able to be successful in banning this book. So what I think is interesting is why Republicans are having some success with this Trojan horse that is parents' rights and protecting kids is because it's the perfect sort of way to rile up and stir up and stoke fears with these made up crises for parents, conservative parents, who might be like, wait, my kids are being indoctrinated. They're making up stories about litter boxes in schools, and they're just trying to scare people. And under the umbrella, everything Republicans ever say they're doing, you have to flip it on its head and realize it's the opposite. So this isn't about parents' rights. It's about controlling other parents' kids and the access that other people's children have to materials and accurate history. Like that's what they're doing.
That's so true. So for people like you and me and our audience who, we pay attention to these things, we understand this because we're engaged. But to those who think that the majority of America, or for those who may not be as in tune or may not be as engaged, what do you think will reach them in terms of kind of realizing that this is the Republican Party that is, present and that this is what America is facing? Are people catching on?
Well, I think conversations like these are crucial for that. And I think coalitions like ours, like your generation and my generation, who may not on paper seem to have as much in common as we actually do, there's so much more that bridges us. That the conversations that we have, Red, White, and Blue talks about this all the time, from friend to friend, colleague to colleague, peer to peer. They're difficult conversations that may seem overwhelming, but they need to be had because I cannot believe that I spend all of my time telling people that they need to pay attention to what's going on in their backyards. And it took an old high school friend of mine to come to me to draw attention to what's happening 2 towns over. I didn't even know. And I thought I was paying attention, but her reaching out to me and starting that conversation has now made me aware of something that I didn't know. And I thought I was tuned in. So keep having the conversations. These conversations are super important. I think that that's the number one thing. Just be truthful, because the truth and the facts are on our side. That is what we have as the greatest weapon of all. And I think with that on our side and conversations, one-on-one conversations, I think we can really move the needle.
Yeah, that's something that you and I, and also Rachel Vidman, who's also part of Red, White, and Blue, we've talked about. And there's a term for that called relational organizing. And I was at the University of Chicago the other week talking about the importance of relational organizing and how even with my group Voters of Tomorrow, we really use that as a tactic to reach young people, because you can have a message on social media, but those individual peer-to-peer conversations really make such a big difference. And I can tell you, I mean, the people in the audience were really intrigued and really interested by this thing, and they've never heard of relational organizing. So I think the more we can push that into kind of the American lexicon, it's really important. And I'm wondering, kind of in that same vein, when you have those individual conversations, if you were to just kind of give our audience a lesson on how do you have those conversations, what are the things that you try to do during those conversations? Is there a way to approach them? Maybe like with Republicans, how do you have an effective one-on-one conversation?
I think the number one thing, it's really hard, especially being from Jersey, is to try not to go into it with your own preconceived notions of why they're wise, right? So it's hard to do that, but try and understand that they may have lots of reasons for why they feel the way they do that are incredibly valid to them, and sort of meet them where they are. But again, something I think is incredibly important is to realize that something we forget all the time is that there's so much more that we have in common than we even realize. Like if I was talking to a local mom, something I know we could agree on is that we both want to keep our kids safe, right? Like it's just kind of common sense. And we both want our kids to be able to go to school and have a safe environment, not just from violence, but a safe and inclusive environment. That we understand that our kids are best served whether or not they are represented in, trans literature or any other kind of literature. Even if that doesn't apply to my kid being in a classroom environment where that kid feels safe benefits my kid. So I think that like having a conversation with someone, trying to find those common threads is incredibly effective, and they exist between even people you think you have the least in common with.
Absolutely. So I want to switch gears a bit to 2024, because as we head into 2024, I think it's really important for us to get the messaging right and for the media to also get the messaging right and how it covers both parties. I'm wondering, how do you think Democrats and the media should talk about the Republican Party? And then I think we'll get to how maybe Democrats should be covered and what we should make of that. But first, the Republican Party.
Well, I think that hitting on the media, I think the media ever since Trump has this idea that they need to be bipartisan, be fair, right? They need to present everybody in the same light. But we're talking about, oranges and hand grenades, right? We're talking about, people who want, environmental and climate action, and people who want to arm teachers in schools. So it's like they have this idea of painting everything with this one broad stroke, but you kind of can't, you know what I mean? So I think for the media, that's the lesson that they need to sort of try and learn quickly, because I don't want biased media, but I also don't want media that leans in the favor of painting someone in a more favorable light than is actually accurate. Yes. As for messaging, I think that sadly, the House Republicans in particular are doing their own messaging exquisitely in terms of what they portend, what they promise for the future, which is nothing, right? They ran on the economy, inflation, the price of milk, eggs, gas, you name it. They ran on all of that. And what have they been doing with their time? First of all, it took them I don't even know, a zillion days to pick a speaker, and that speaker is about as feckless as he could be, and powerless, by the way. But in the meantime, they've had hearings on Twitter, Hunter Biden, Dr. Fauci. Weaponization of government nonsense, and they're not addressing the needs of the people, and it's nothing but chaos. And that's what 2 years will be, and nothing will be accomplished. And the American people, again, we get back to this, already spoke loudly about this. This was a referendum on the chaos that the American people are tired of. That's why Carrie Lake lost. That's why lots of candidates lost. And that is, no one has an appetite for that. And the Republicans are going to have, I call it crackhead palooza for the next few years. Crackhead with a Q. Right?
I love it.
That's it. It's just a parade of nonsense and performative stunts that get the American people nowhere. And what do we want from our government? That's not it. So messaging, let them run wild.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I love the term that you just coined. But I'm wondering, you have Republicans they have no rock bottom. You see Marjorie Taylor Greene calling for secession on President's Day. You have Kevin McCarthy giving really key committee assignments to just far right, really dangerous people. You mentioned that they're trying to make the AR-15 or this assault weapon the national weapon. I'm just kind of curious in terms of what Democrats do in response to this. There's that classic Michelle Obama quote, "When they go low, we go high." One of the things that I admire most about you is that you're not afraid to go on their level and call them out. But for Democrats and Democratic officials and the Democratic Party, do you think it's time for them to get on that same level as Republicans, or do we take the high road and just I don't know what is our way forward for Democrats, and is that kind of Michelle Obama framework effective?
It's such a fine line. It's a
Yeah.
tightrope, really, because somebody like me, I can go on Twitter and get down in the mud with the pigs, right? Like, I hate using that animal analogy, but I can do that because I'm an elected official, and I'm not really responsible for setting policy or setting a tone or representing a party. So it's interesting because I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you do. There was this viral tweet thread from the White House Twitter account where when they were being criticized for sending money, I think maybe it was to Ukraine, they put a thread together, which was a thread of all of the different Republican elected officials who'd received PPP money and were forgiven, had their loans forgiven, right? And it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was classic shade. It was incredibly effective. And it still didn't sink to their level of getting in the mud and really getting down and dirty. So did I freeze?
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
So it's a very fine line because we don't want to get dirty because the saying is, right, like you get in the mud and the pig likes it. That's kind of what they want, is to pull us down so that we engage in the same kind of chaos, and by virtue of that fact it cancels out everything they're doing. But we also cannot continue to have blinders on and think we're dealing with the Republican Party of 1996, because we're not. There's a different animal. We have to approach it differently. We have to be smart about it. And I think that thread, that approach was smart and savvy and effective for that reason, because you go right back at them, you point out the hypocrisy, and that is the key. Because once you point out the hypocrisy, and you could do that all day long, the American people are like, wait a minute, that makes a lot of sense. And so you've managed to defeat them without getting dirty at the same time.
Yes. I think pointing out the hypocrisy is one of the most effective ways to do this. And we don't have to get down in the dirt, like you said. We can just do things as simple as pointing out the hypocrisy. And that is very telling. While we talk about all the bad stuff that Republicans do, I also just want to briefly talk about what President Biden and Democrats have been able to accomplish over the past couple of years, because I don't think there's quite as much attention on that as we want. If you were to tell people just on the street, over just a random person, about what this administration has accomplished over the past 2 years, what would that be?
I mean, it's pretty remarkable because of all of their fist pounding and performative stunts and gas stoves and Muppets and chocolate characters. What they're doing is they're trying to distract the American people from seeing just what you just said. So this has been one of the most consequential presidents in our history. And he did it in an environment that is so polarized and so partisan that it is even more remarkable. I think that Joe Biden may have come into his term expecting that he was going to be able to reach across the aisle to the Republican Party that he knew as it existed once upon a time. That's dinosaur now, but he learned quickly. He learned really quickly. And think about the things that this president has been able to accomplish. We have the first actual gun legislation in decades. We have a climate bill. We have, marriage equality. He's done all of this with a very divided government and with huge pushback from the Republicans, who don't want to see him accomplish anything and purely exist to obstruct. I mean, look what he's done for the economy, for jobs. He's a massive monster when it comes to jobs and decreasing the deficit. If I were to talk to anyone, I would say, don't listen to the noise that you hear about the price of gas or the price of eggs or all of the stuff that you think is Joe Biden's fault. Like, there's global things at play there. Let's focus on what he's actually accomplished, which is absolutely incredible.
So true.
Infrastructure was a running joke for 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency, 2 of which he had the House and the Senate, and still didn't pass infrastructure or health care. And Joe Biden has an infrastructure bill already under his belt.
I mean, this is a president who has delivered and done so much, and I really hope people understand that. My final question to you is your thoughts on what everyone in our audience, just regular people at home, can do to prevent Republicans from winning between now and 2024.
You know what they might do. First of all, you can pay attention, and if you can't pay attention, look, who can? I'm a working mom. You're a college student. Like, who can pay attention to all of it. But there are people out there that are paying attention, that you're paying attention, I'm paying attention enough that people can look to us for like, what, now I think I froze. Did I freeze?
Oh, no, I still see you. Unless maybe I think maybe
You
I
may have frozen.
Yeah.
Also, there are people like us who are willing to help or out there helping sift through all that noise so that you can see clearly what is actually happening, like this parents' rights, protecting children noise. We can keep, sort of demystifying what all of that means. And I think just keeping an eye towards this is it feels like it's not an election year, but there's huge elections still happening. There's a Wisconsin Supreme Court race that is incredibly consequential. And I think we can all start paying attention. And what we can do is we can get involved in whatever way that we're comfortable, whether that's knocking on doors for some people or, making phone calls for somebody else or just talking to a friend. But I think paying attention and sifting through a lot of the noise and static that's out there is something we can all do.
Yeah, and we all have a role in this democracy and to get involved.
Absolutely.
Jo, thank you so much for joining. This has been such a fun conversation, and one of these days we're going to have to meet in person because
Yes.
we have to make that happen.
Absolutely. And it's going to be epic.
Yes.
Our world will collide. There'll be lightning strikes.
I love it. Jo, thanks so much. Great seeing you.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, that was a wonderful episode with Jo. She is a firepower on Twitter, just someone who, like we said, is not hesitant to get down in the dirt with Republicans and really has done so much to kind of continue pushing the narrative. There are two things I want to talk about before I let you all go for your weekend. I know here in LA it's raining. There's actually a blizzard warning. We were talking about it right before the show started. It's crazy what's happening here. But there are two things I want to talk about. First is yesterday, Pete Buttigieg visited East Palestine, Ohio, and I think it was a really important showing. First of all, he acknowledged that he made a mistake for not going to Ohio or not acknowledging this railroad incident earlier. But at the same time, he owned up to his mistake. He listened to community members. He offered a commitment to really move forward and make sure this never happens again. Meanwhile, Republicans are attacking him for just really nonsense stuff. And I think it's important to kind of use this moment as just another indication that, one, leaders aren't perfect. I think this is a great kind of insight into what leadership actually is. Leaders aren't perfect. What they do is they own up to their mistakes and they actually make a commitment to make sure that it never happens again. And that's what Pete Buttigieg is doing. Yesterday, he answered questions from the press and he proved yet again why he's such an effective and essential communicator for the Democratic Party. But he also really kind of owned up to his mistakes and he made sure that this is a moment where both parties can come together. He's in East Palestine, Ohio, and he's committed to actually making a difference and making sure that the Department of Transportation actually starts to enforce its policies and starts to reform its regulations. And so I think it was a good trip for Pete Buttigieg to make. Again, was it perfect for him to make it this late? Probably not, but it's nonetheless an important showing, and he is, I think, committed to, at least right now as we see it, and we can hold him to account for it later, but he's listening to the members of East Palestine, Ohio. He's really making sure that reform happens. I think we can all take some comfort in that. And in that same vein, yesterday we saw the National Transportation Safety Board Chair, Jennifer Homendy, say that what happened in East Palestine was 100% preventable. Things like the train crew attempting to stop it after receiving a critical alert. Things like as the train slowed, there was an emergency brake activated, which may indicate that the train experienced some separation during the deacceleration phase. The surveillance video, I mean, all of these things show that it could have been prevented. So now I think East Palestine deserves Ohio. We need accountability. And I think we'll all be paying attention to what happens going forward. One other piece of news is that prosecutors in Jack Smith's office have now asked the chief judge in DC's federal court to compel Mike Pence to testify as a witness for special counsel Jack Smith's investigation. As we all know, Mike Pence has claimed several privileges. First, he was separation of powers. Now it's speech and debate. But it's been kind of this constant evasion of facing accountability, facing prosecutors, facing Jack Smith. But as I think Mike Pence is probably learning right now, and as Donald Trump should learn if he hasn't learned already, Jack Smith is not one to play around. It seems like Mike Pence can try to run all he wants, but they're going to try to find a way to get him to testify, and whether or not he likes it, it's going to happen. And so I think accountability is coming, and we should all pay attention to what happens on that Jack Smith front. It's really an investigation that's picking up pace. Yesterday, we were talking about it with Katie Fang. When you look at the traditional way in which prosecutors bring a case, it usually starts from the lower kind of level people and then goes all the way up. And we are pretty much at the top of the totem pole, short of Donald Trump. And so hopefully we'll get a subpoena from Donald Trump very soon. But Jack Smith is running and he is not stopping. And Mike Pence, if you're listening to this, which I'm sure you're not, but if you are, you cannot hide. So that's all that I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode with JoJo from Jerz. Be sure to tune in next week for more episodes of On the Move. We have some great guests lined up for you, and you'll find them out over the weekend. And as we head into next week, you don't want to miss that. We'll be back every day right here on youtube.com/Politicon every Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss that. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share this show with any of your friends or young people in your life who might be interested in learning more about Gen Z and just about the news of the day. So thanks so much for watching. I am grateful for all of you, and I will see you all next week. Have a great rest of your weekend.